All right, and we'll get started here in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And welcome, lucky listeners, to this episode of the Real Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Edwards. Alongside me today, we have the founder and CEO of FinalStraw, Miss Emma Rose. Emma, thanks for being with us today.
Hey, Kevin, thanks for having me.
And FinalStraw's mission, well, they're on a mission to create reusable, responsibly made, badass products that reduce the need for plastics, empower individuals to change their buying habits, and raise awareness of the impacts of everyday decisions. So, Emma, for preparing for this interview, I saw that you like to say straws suck. So my first question for you, Emma, today is, what is the flaw with straws?
So the problem really is in single use. Straws aren't the problem. It's the way we consume products and throw them away. There's so many resources that go into creating any single use item, whether it's packaging, straws, a whole host of things, the Amazon box that you get and throw away in 5 minutes. And we don't necessarily think about the upstream impact. So that's like all of the materials, water, waste, that's created in manufacturing that product, because we're generally thinking more about where does it go when we throw it away. So what we're trying to do is kind of retrain people to think not only about where does the product go when you throw it away, but also like what goes into making that product, and how can we redesign things so that we're not wasting all of these materials and energy and fuel to make something that lasts 30 seconds and then we throw it away. So, a lot of times, like I will say, plastic isn't the problem, it's the way we use it. Plastic is this incredible, innovative, amazing material that has allowed us to have, medical advancements beyond what we could have even imagined, 50 years ago. But when we use it in a single use application, because it is a material that's designed to last forever, that is the problem. And straws particularly, I think, were chosen as this symbol of the waste reduction movement because they're such low-hanging fruit. The majority of people do not need a straw to drink. There are people out there that do, and so this does not apply to them. That is a totally separate topic. But for most people, you get a straw in your drink and maybe you take it out and just put it on the table and throw it away. Or you take a couple sips out of it and then, it gets thrown away. And so this is something that people hadn't really thought about because it was so automatic. We just always got a drink with a straw in it. And then, this massive movement came along where people were really trying to highlight the amount of waste that's happening in our everyday lives. And it was like, let's pick one thing that's like really easy to remove. Let's pick one thing, because if we can get people to make this small change, then they likely will be able to incorporate larger changes into their lifestyle down the line.
Yeah, Emma, really in the last 2 years, probably 3 years, this has really picked up. Yeah. Like it's like, when you go to a Starbucks or, any, McDonald's, not to ask for that straw, or you say something, they always ask you, do you want this straw with your order? And, sometimes do you feel a little guilty about it? I mean, what have maybe some industry leaders, like what changes have industry leaders done for this cause that's really helped inspire, the consumers and really help drive, brand awareness for FinalStraw?
Well, what really kicked off the straw movement was that Seattle banned straws. Right. The nonprofit, The Lonely Whale, worked with the city of Seattle to create this ordinance. And that created this kind of tidal wave of legislation as well as corporate buy-in. So you had all of these kind of other cities banning straws all around. But then what was kind of the most amazing thing to watch was then you had like places like Starbucks, IKEA, Alaska Airlines, Marriott, these humongous corporations coming out against straws and really trying to get behind the movement. Whether it's greenwashing or they actually do care is debatable. But either way, this movement was so powerful that these large companies saw it and saw that they also needed to do something about it.
So back to your original first response, you said plastic isn't the problem, but you also mentioned like single-use plastic is a problem. Maybe elaborate on that a little bit more and kind of where you see FinalStraw's role in that reduction.
Yeah. So I mean, it's funny because when you go to the store and there was this whole debate on like, paper versus plastic, and everyone's like, oh, it's okay, paper's better. It's better if it's packaged in paper. Well, that's actually not true. Paper takes 4 times as much water, energy, fuel, transport costs than plastic because it's a heavier material made out of trees. So what's good about paper though is that in end of life, if it's sent to a compost facility, it can break down into and create compost. But what happens with paper, because most places don't have citywide composting facilities, is that it ends up going to a landfill. And so in a landfill, paper is surrounded by all of this plastic, which means that it digests without the presence of oxygen, which is called anaerobic digestion. When the materials biodegrade, they aerobically digest. So that means that there's oxygen present, which means that it produces CO2 as the off gas, which everyone knows is, carbon dioxide, which is part of the reason we're having, global climate change. Now, when something anaerobically digests, it produces 40 times the amount of greenhouse gas effects because it produces methane. Because without the presence of oxygen, methane is released, which is a much worse CO2 or a much worse greenhouse gas. Mm-hmm. So, that's a long-winded answer of why you can't just say paper is better than plastic. Ultimately, single use is the problem when we're putting all of these resources and materials into something that we're using for 5 minutes and then throwing it away. It's like, we're inherently assigning that item a value of 0 when it doesn't have a 0 value. There's all of these materials and energy and money that go into making these items, and yet they're thrown away without any two thoughts about it. Plastic, on the other hand, and every material that we deal with has a different life cycle. So like, a lot of times I'll talk about how recycling is broken, and like that's not true for every material. Like metal is a really important material to recycle. But plastic is not getting recycled right now. So every time that you use a plastic water bottle or whatever it might be, and then you feel kind of guilty about using it, but then you put it in the recycling bin so you don't feel so guilty, it's a lie. We basically used recycling to prop up consumerism so that people feel better about their consumption. But they found studies that recycling actually increases use. So they did this really cool experiment where they put 2 different groups of people in a room each. And one group, they're both told that they are testing scissors. But in one room, the people had a trash can and a recycling bin. And in the other room, they just had a trash can. And what they found is that in the presence of a recycling bin, the people testing paper use 30% more paper. And it's called the moral licensing effect. And so we basically feel better about decisions that would be, deemed negative by society if there's like an outlet that makes it better. So, recycling is really tough because we always lean on it as like, I'm a steward to the environment. I care, I recycle. And that's what we've been taught since we were kids. Like I even still to this day find myself having to like, be like, no, like it's not true. Better. And it's tough because people are like, well, what are the options? And it's like, okay, well, it's going to involve a lifestyle change, which not very many people want to do. But that is why, I'm so passionate about this topic, because I really truly believe that with the proper tools, we can replace single use with items that are designed to last forever and that are convenient to carry around with you. And it will make sense moving forward that this is a viable alternative. And, paired with that, we also need innovation in materials. And so, there's a really cool company, Lollyware. They're doing seaweed straws and looking at other like marine biodegradable materials. So, the other, not to go on too much of a rant right now, but like, the other material issue is around biodegradable plastic. And that's because plastic, well, these biodegradable plastics, first of all, a lot of times will contain a majority petroleum product. So they're only using a small fraction of a biological resource for the polymer chain, for the plastic. But the other issue is that like you have to send it to an industrial compost facility for it to biodegrade. Well, when is the last time you had access to one? They're few and far between, and there's very few cities that have these infrastructures set up. It's becoming more popular, but it's also incredibly expensive. So it's difficult for cities to implement these systems where you can actually send a biodegradable plastic cup to an industrial composter and it actually biodegrades. So that's like, I know that's a lot of information, and that's why it's really hard to like get all of this across, because people just kind of want, what's better, A or B? And I'm like, well, that depends. Do you have access to an industrial composter? And they're like, what?
Right. Well, Emma, it seems like you're really passionate about this topic. You've obviously had many years of experience researching and diagnosing this robust problem. But I want to touch on a couple things you mentioned. The first one is the decomposition of plastic. Now, were you referring to the decomposition of paper when you were saying 40 times more likely with methane?
Yeah. So plastic, actually, yes, I was referring to paper with the 40 times more potent. That is methane. Plastic doesn't biodegrade. Right. It photodegrades. So when exposed to light, plastic breaks down into lots of tiny little pieces that then stay at this, kind of microscopic, sometimes a little bigger level. The big issue with plastic in the ocean, well, there's a lot of issues with it, but one of them is that it is obviously floating at the surface. And so it's breaking down with the sunlight. And then it's turning into these pieces that are about the size of plankton. Well, plankton is the basis of the food chain in the ocean. And so, when fish eat, they're not like, that looks like a yummy piece of plankton, I'm going to eat that up. Like they just kind of open their mouth like a fat man at the buffet. And then like whatever goes in, goes in. And so it's like they are consuming, tons of plastic, sometimes more plastic than fish in a day. And so their stomachs fill up with plastic, and they obviously aren't getting any nutritional value of it, but they're starving to death because the way our nervous system works is that we release a hormone when our stomachs get empty, which basically signals to our brain that we're hungry. And so if your stomach is constantly full of plastic, you won't get that signaling, and therefore you won't eat. And that's why a lot of the, birds and fish and stuff are coming washed ashore with stomachs full of plastic.
Interesting. Yeah, I've looked into a couple studies like that, and a lot of them have kind of been like inconclusive, but I've never heard of that, that it affects the nervous system.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Well, the reason I asked is because you brought up a really good point about the psychology with the two classrooms. If you have a recycle bin, you're more likely to use plastic and recycle. With decomposition, why does it make sense for us to recycle plastic then, if it's going to eventually, I guess not produce methane and greenhouse gases into the atmosphere if it goes into a landfill?
Right. Right now, it doesn't. Right now, we don't have the recycling infrastructure. So it 100% does not make sense to recycle it. What happened in January of 2018 is China stopped taking our recycling. So what we used to do is get, all of our crap from China sent in these containers. And then we would basically fill those containers with all the trash and packaging and garbage and be like, okay, China, you deal with it. And a lot of it, was under the guise of recycling. So they tried putting in stricter regulations on contamination rates of like what we were allowed to send. But like, because we do single stream recycling in the United States, which means that we throw all of our recycling in one bin, you have super high contamination rates. And the idea around single stream is that you increase volumes because you get people recycling more, but you just get lower quality. Which ultimately, we've seen now is not the answer. But either way, so China puts up this restriction and basically says, look, we're not taking any of your recycling anymore. And now we are in the depths of trying to figure out what to do. And what we're doing is sending all of it to landfill. At least, and when I put a little asterisk by this, because metals are different. And depending on where you are in the country, paper could be a little different, but there are no stateside plastic recycling facilities right now that are able to handle the scale of which we produce. So yeah, I mean, we're totally lying to ourselves by recycling those materials. They're ending up in the landfill, and we're ending up with that warm, fuzzy feeling that makes us feel good about ourselves every time you put something in the recycling bin.
Well, I'm really happy you brought up China, because I've had a couple conversations with some recycling leaders in this space. And for people listening to this, though, if you don't know anything about the China, the recycling, I guess, block they just put on a couple of years ago, it kind of started. Now, everyone has to keep in mind, like, China, pretty poor country a couple of years ago, and like to fit their manufacturing needs, they started collecting, like, it was like 70% of the world's like recyclables. So everyone's like billions and billions of tons of plastic just going to China, and then them, recycling those and using them for their products and their supply chain. And I believe the recyclables that we were sending over, yes, they were like, unsorted recyclables, but it was all recyclable stuff. It wasn't just like trash and things like that. Because I think it's like the United States, I think the United States produces like 2% of the world's like recyclable waste, versus like China, Asia, India, and the Philippines contribute like 70% of that. So it's an interesting little factoid there. So when China, to go on your point about like creating comparables, and if you have a recycle bin, you're going to use more plastic. When China stopped 2 years ago, recycle companies like yours have innovated ways to go around this problem and create a new market opportunity for this. When was the realization point for you, Emma, when you understood that you could really have an impact on this recycling issue?
Well, I was working at, I guess, to like start off my journey, I was in college in Santa Barbara, and just kind of started having these like moments where I'd look around and there's trash everywhere. I mean, everyone was like partying their brains out, and there's just like beer cans and cups and like all this stuff all over the streets. And I'm like, this is crazy. We're like a group of people seeking a higher education, trying to change the world, and yet like this is what we're leaving as our legacy. So it felt really contradictory to me as like my purpose there, to kind of like learn and grow and like become this, better person. And yet like this was the actual impact I was having. So that started kind of messing with my head. And at the same time, I had a few other girlfriends who were kind of thinking the same thing. So we started doing some beach cleanups, and we just like happened to have mermaid outfits. So we're like, yeah, let's like dress up like mermaids and like do some beach cleanups. And that eventually evolved into creating a nonprofit where we did ocean education and after school programs for kids to really, first of all, like tell them about the problem around plastic, because at the end of the day, it's like a million times easier to have a kid convince their mom than for me to convince their mom. So if the kid comes home and it's like, mommy, like, why are we using Ziploc bags? They're so bad for the environment. The mom's gonna be like, oh shit. And, right. But if I do it, the mom's gonna be like, I'm so busy. Don't tell me what to do. Like, so like finding the kind of easy ways to make changes. And then from there, that's when I found my passion and was like, okay, this is the work I want to be doing. I just don't really know in what capacity. So I ended up enrolling in grad school and then got a job at Los Alamos National Laboratory in waste minimization and worked there for about 4 years. And that was my real like formal training. And during that time, when I was doing my master's, I did my thesis on to-go container waste. And I basically invented this like to-go container in my thesis. And so I was really excited about this. And then at that same time, like saw the kind of like way that the conversation was shifting around straws, because I knew that Seattle was banning straws. And this was going to be a pretty like big deal because no one had done that yet. And so I basically pivoted on that idea and started working with my former co-founder on this concept. And yeah, it was such a kind of pie in the sky idea. Like we just had no clue what was going to happen. And so, quit my job and moved up to Whistler and was like trying to be a ski bum, but also was starting this company. And then, the Kickstarter just exploded overnight. And so I did not get to ski at all.
So you're on Kickstarter, right? You're raising, you raised, was it over $1.8 million on Kickstarter or something like that?
Yeah.
Okay. So you raise on this crowdsourcing platform. People are moved by this FinalStraw product that can reduce these plastic straws. And now you have all this capital. What comes along with the capital? What responsibilities come along with that? What growing pains did you experience?
Mo problems. It was such an incredible moment to have the world validate what I cared so much about. Going into it, it was like no one was like, this is going to be a slam dunk. Like no one was telling me that, this is the idea that's going to, set your company apart. So I went into it with incredibly low expectations and just like, was like, this is fun. I like doing it. It's something that I would like to see in the world. And maybe there's more people out there like me. And so there were, and so it was so bonkers to just like, put your heart and soul into a project, put it on the internet. And then the world is just like, yes, 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 yes. And you're just like, this is crazy. It was so amazing, but also just terrifying. I mean, I had a full panic attack and just like couldn't eat or sleep for the first 3 days the Kickstarter went live. Like I was losing my mind, just like crying and like just fully freaking out. And then, the emails were just crazy. You're getting hundreds of emails a day. We didn't have any customer support team at all. So I'm like hiring people as quickly as I can, like bringing on family, like anyone that like knows how to type. And it really goes to show that people want change and people are looking for alternatives, and there need to be more companies out there innovating such that we can reduce plastic waste, but it is going to take a lot of companies and a lot of ideas and a lot of trials and a lot of failures to make it happen. But
that's such a cool story. So I can continue.
Yeah. In terms of your question around like, what did the money bring? Massive anxiety. And then, it's like, we didn't even celebrate the Kickstarter. It was like the day the Kickstarter was over, it was like the impending dread of the fact that I needed to deliver 100,000 straws in 6 months when I had no finalized design, no manufacturer, no clue what I was doing. That all started kind of like trickling in, and I was just like, oh dear, like what have I gotten myself into? Like, yes, I have all this money, but now I have really big problems I need to figure out and at a mass scale. So it's not just making a couple hundred straws anymore. It's like, how do we make, 100,000 straws?
Well, I'm sorry the spring ski season pass went to waste.
That's okay. There'll be more.
No time on the mountain. Well, very, very interesting, Emma. I was going to say, I was speaking with the guy who was a part of like Florida State's entrepreneurship program. And we were having a really very heartfelt conversation about capitalism and if it can be used to sustain the planet, people, and profits. And so his whole thesis, I guess my thesis was, yes, a social entrepreneur can also be someone in a for-profit, case in point. So, and he didn't really understand this concept, and a lot of people don't. So would you mind explaining, here's the question, is profit at the center of your focus? Like, are you focused solely on for-profit, or are you focused more on, this purpose-driven in our impact? And how do you measure that?
Yeah. So what's beautiful about not having investors is that you don't have to focus on profit. You can focus on building the best company possible, and really keeping that triple bottom line. So people, planet, profit. That will always be our model, and I will only bring on investors that understand that. But I think a lot of people feel like they get pressured into making decisions solely based on profit because they brought in outside capital and therefore have to answer to those people. But I don't have to answer to anyone. And so every decision I make is like, is this right for the company? And does this align with our values? And our values are, about supporting community, helping the planet, and increasing awareness around single-use plastics. So really, if it doesn't align with those things, then it's like, it's an easy decision to say no to. But yeah, it's like, how much money do I need? Like, I think people get so caught up with like all of the, money and things that you can buy, but it's like, I'm kind of the opposite. Like, I don't like having a lot of stuff, and I like, living minimally, and like, of course I still like to do, nice things, but, I try and also just keep a balance. So, as long as we can keep paying all the employees and do some cute Christmas presents, it's like, we're doing great.
That's real talk for sure. Well, thanks for sharing that, Emma. Actually, one of our coworkers uses a FinalStraw, and so I was asking her. I say, well, Lee, what do you like about this straw? And she says, I like the bling aspect to it. She's like, I like how it's shiny, it's portable. She's like, and I was so pissed when I lost my FinalStraw and I had to get another one. I think someone stole it, and so it's interesting. So, well, how difficult has it been for you to adopt carrying around, a straw with you at all times? And she said, not that difficult at all. What have you found maybe in your research in terms of your own consumers purchasing a FinalStraw and using it or losing it?
Yeah. It's funny. Everyone says, or there's all these different studies about how long it takes to make a habit. And I'm like, I think it takes like a day. You just kind of, and I guess it depends what kind of conviction you have with the decision, but it's like, that's why we made FinalStraw a keychain. It's like, you put it on your keys, you bring your keys wherever, and then boom, like, I guess the habit may be that you need to, ask for your drink with no straw, but like, I don't fully subscribe to it taking 28 days to learn how to say that every time. So, I think people obviously lose the straw, and that's a total bummer because, it's got an environmental impact just like everything else. And it has an environmental impact that's higher than a single-use plastic straw because of all the materials that go into it. So, we certainly hope that people are doing their best to keep it on them, and then we also back everything with a lifetime guarantee. So if anything breaks with your straw, anything goes wrong, we'll take it back and fix it and send you a new one, depending. So, the idea is like, it's like, we really want to be solving the problem. Like, I don't want to just be making more crap to like, sell to people. It's like, we want to be making items that actually serve a purpose. And it's like, especially around holiday season right now, it's like, God, I'm getting all these like gifts where I'm like, I don't want this. Like, I don't need this. This serves no purpose. Like, what am I going to do, with this freaking like fruit basket covered in plastic? Like, do you even know me? But that's what we're trying to do. It's like, how can we make thoughtful products that people actually want and really enjoy and use on a regular basis?
So speaking of, you said products. Do you have more than one product? Are you diversifying? What are you doing?
We are. Yeah, we're working on a bunch of things. I'm super, super excited. We've got a fork that's in the works, and final fork.
There you go.
Yeah, that's going to be really, really cool. That's like the product that I've really been waiting for, because honestly, I don't even use straws. I stopped using them like 10 years ago. And then here I am, the straw lady. It's kind of weird, but, so we're also working on a smoothie or boba straw, because with all of these straw bans that have been happening, all of the boba shops are freaking out because they don't know what to do. And so we're really close to having a very cool, different, innovative replacement.
Wait, hold on one second. I'm like, this fork. What's different about this fork than my normal, metal fork?
Yeah. So, well, this is designed for travel. So, if you look on the internet right now to see what is out there in terms of travel wear, it's really limited. I have my like bamboo travel fork, but it's not sexy. And that's to your point of what your coworker said. It's like, you want the bling, like how do we make reusables an elevated experience, because people use single-use plastic because it's convenient. Okay. So like you're eating, maybe you go to a food truck and it's this like artisan, amazing, fancy foodie, whatever. And then yet you're eating it off of like a single-use plate with a plastic fork. It's like, for me, like I need a well-rounded experience. I want the whole thing to feel good. I want the feeling of the fork in my mouth to feel nice. And like, all of these tiny little things that make people change behaviors. So mixing this kind of elevated experience with the bling aspect, with making, sustainability is a mega trend now. It's cool to be sustainable. So let's design these beautiful products that replace single-use plastic and make people feel like they're identifying with the movement by using the products. And so the fork, it's going to be kind of same concept as the straw, where it folds down into a little case. You can put it on your keychain. You can carry it however you want, and take it wherever you go. So you never have to use single-use plastic fork or knife or spoon ever again.
Emma, you seem like really passionate about this. Obviously, it seems like your pride and joy, and that sometimes is very contagious in terms of like bringing on new employees and people with similar values. Have you found that to be an advantage for FinalStraw? And are people coming to your organization because they want to make the same impact that you want to make?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that more and more people want jobs with a deeper mission. That's what I hear in interviews all the time. I was working at like, this like stockbroker place, whatever. And it like, there's no purpose to what I'm doing. So I'm bored and I'm kind of depressed and I want something else. This is so new for our generation. I think our parents' generation were really focused on like, making a better life for us. And now, a lot of us have the better life. So it's like, okay, what can I do that like fills a deeper need inside me beyond just paying the bills? And I think that's one really big advantage we have in hiring, is that we're not just selling knickknacks. We're selling things that are making all of these ripple effects and changes throughout the world. And, we certainly attract a certain type of candidate for those jobs.
Emma, you mentioned what was it? We've had a world validation of people purchasing straws. This is really big. I mean, what's it going to take in terms of a shift in consciousness in order to help consumers and both consumers and industry leaders to make these conscious decisions like you have put forth today?
Yeah, that's a question I think about a lot. And I ask my friends a lot because, every single person, almost pretty much every person who's stopped using single-use plastic did use it at one point. So I ask like, what was your aha moment? And most people don't just have one. It's a lot of moments combined together. And so I think that, we need to be telling the story in a way where, first of all, people want to listen. And then, they then get to take the facts. And it's not about saying you're bad for using plastic or like you don't care about the earth. It's about saying, look, here's the facts around these materials. Here's the impact that it's causing to the world, to future generations, to, financial issues, to health issues. If you care about any of those things, maybe, you should look into this. So I think it's, ultimately it's a lot about marketing and how are we spinning the story? How are we getting people involved? How are we getting people engaged? And then to just make sure that we continue amplifying the voices of people who are telling the story, because it's not going to change. And no matter how many freaking ocean cleanup projects we launch and spend, hundreds of millions of dollars doing, it's a waste, because we have to turn off the tap. There's no point in doing cleanups unless we stop the, dumping of plastic into the ocean that's happening at a rate of a dump truck every second.
It's even in your mission, what impact are we going to have on our everyday decisions, our everyday actions? Leaders think about that a lot, Emma. So the last question I have for you today is what is your definition of a real leader?
I think it's someone who leads from a place of truth and inspires people to think differently and level up.
Think differently.
I think, yeah. I mean, the real leaders, like, they get you fired up. They get you so excited to pursue whatever it may be that is your passion. I'll listen to someone talk about something completely out of scope from what I'm working on, and yet can distill some of the information that they're saying and apply it to what I'm doing. And then it kind of shoots me off into the universe in some way. So yeah, I think, there's so many incredible leaders out there and people that I've drawn a ton of inspiration from. And so, they get me fired up. A real leader gets you fired up and points you in a direction, because you don't want to just be fired up with nowhere to go.
I love it. Well, I'm fired up. I hope our listeners are fired up. I'm sure they are. Emma, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. We talked about a lot. Talked about the flaws with straws, some problems in plastic and recycling, what happens to these products in the future. We talked about the Kickstarter campaign, how you had to quit your skiing and go start the company early with all these donations coming in from the crowdsourced platform. And then lastly, we wrapped up with your leadership advice. So Emma, just want to thank you again for coming on the Real Leaders podcast. For Emma Rose, I'm Kevin Edwards, asking you to go out there, think differently, and always, folks, keep it real. Thanks, Emma.
Thanks, Kevin.